So I think that when we think about the lesson as a whole, we try to find ways in which we break that down into segments that the students can understand. So there's always a lecture component that goes along with it, but the lecture is just a small part of what we do. So we try to make it engaging. So there's always activities. There also might be a video that I might share that talks about the world going on around them. And then I apply that to the lesson as a whole. And then I always leave time for student interaction, either as a group or as a class as a whole, so that it's not just the application of the material that we see as far as the textbook, the pedagogy, but how does that apply in their real world? I'm always mindful that it should be a practical application of what we learn in the classroom. It does me no good to teach you all this theory and all this information if you can't use it in your everyday lives. I want my students to know that communication covers every facet of their lives, and how we live and how we love in our professional realm, the world that we work in. And yet I want them to, one, be able to identify who they are and be comfortable with that, have a healthy self-concept. And along with that healthy self-concept, I want them to, in this case here, when you think about perception and the world around them, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, because their stereotypes, they play itself out in how we live and how we work. But being mindful of those things so that they can actively use their voice in these professional realms, but also in their personal lives too, and that they make a difference. And so if they leave the classroom and they learn something about their identity and they learn something about perception and how I apply these things to the world around them, then I've done my job and I've done it well. I can say my work with the DICR has been, I guess, the most surprising and yet the most gratifying thing I've done possibly in the last year. I was excited that Alan reached out to say, hey, I heard you, and we're looking at doing something different with this textbooks when we have the next edition. So I was pleased in that regard. And so with the DICR, what we're doing is actually looking at that content, the language and the imagery and the presentation of it, to find out if we could do better as far as making sure we look at diversity and inclusiveness and all the things about able-bodiedness and all those things along the way. And so that the long term we do have more culturally responsive pedagogy. And so again, it's the most gratifying because someone heard me, which is what you always tell your students, that speak up, you have a voice, and that maybe it'll make a difference. Now, even if it didn't make a difference, I would have still spoken up. But the fact that it was acknowledged and that maybe the industry as a whole might change and address these issues beforehand, because the reality of it is that students don't have a choice in the textbooks that they have to use. And sometimes faculty, particularly adjuncts, don't have a choice either. So you're giving thousands of students these textbooks without having any insight into what they might actually have to learn from. And I think that, again, as the industry changes, I think that should be at the forefront of what we do as educators, being mindful of the population that we serve. What's most exciting about the DICR is that the textbook that students receive will actually represent the world that they live in. And so I think I was sharing before in different situations how maybe even the name, and you use a name actually in a textbook. It doesn't always have to be a David, or it doesn't have to be a Daniel. It could be maybe a Gabriella. It can be, a Marcella, those types of images and names, so that you see yourself represented in the world at large. And I think there's a bigger picture here, because once you see that you're representing the world at large, your world expands. And it's not just my small community or my small town or my county or my village, but I can see myself outside of that, outside of Florida, outside of Atlanta, outside of this nation, and making an impact on the world around me, because I know it includes me. And I think that's what, as far as language itself, communication, the words, the images, that's what they do for us in a textbook, and that's what it does for the world at large, particularly for students. It allows you to expand your world view.